This is a very much shorter version of a very long chapter that won't be published as part of this series, but is coming out in a book called Receptions of Newman, Oxford University Press, next year. The second lecture I'm giving in this series, which it has not been written yet, is scheduled for June next year, and that will be part of the book that Kenneth is referring to. In the very unlikely event that anyone is unable to sleep at night and desperate to read the chapter of which this is a very short extract, all you have to do is to email me and I'll send you the whole thing. Okay. Reinhard Hutter, a German theologian now working in the United States, gives us a wonderfully succinct comment on the changing contexts of Newman's life. One sentence. John Henry Newman was born in 1801, the age of carriages, front-loaded muskets, and sailboats. He died in 1890, the age of the first transcontinental express trains, machine guns, and ocean steamers. So he had a long life. And I'm going to focus very narrowly on a topic that's of particular interest to educators and even more narrowly philosophers of education. Newman has frequently been quoted in the context of the aims of university education, but usually along the lines that he offers a noble, civilized, and idealized vision, quaint and now outdated, a vision whose passing is lamented, but the implementation of which is simply impossible. And while his name is often invoked by Christian scholars and institutions as a model of how to bring together intellectual and religious concerns, a number of things create a barrier. His religious presuppositions, his style of writing, his conservative cultural assumptions, and the sheer ambitious scope of his vision of what the university should aspire to, in the eyes of many educational thinkers, makes him irrelevant today. Even so cultivated a scholar as Martha Nussbaum, in two valuable books of hers on liberal education and the humanities, makes no mention of Newman, though her own vision harmoniously resonates with his in many ways. And if you look at many of the volumes of books on philosophy of education, more often than not, Newman's name is left out. His much celebrated articulation of the gentleman as a product of university education, his focus on knowledge for its own sake, in contrast to its utility, the mistaken view that he ruled out professional education from the curriculum, and that he neglected research, apart from his frequent use of language permeated by Christian faith, and his strong argument that theology should play a key role in the curriculum, and his assumption that the church has a right to exert an important influence on educational provision, all these things make him an uncomfortable source for many contemporary philosophers of education. I will argue that once one has made allowances for his style, and even if one brackets off his religious commitments, there remains much in Newman's work that can usefully guide educators, and most especially those teaching in universities. So I'm going to explore today one central theme in Newman, the need for comprehensiveness in a university curriculum, giving priority to the sense of the whole and unity and interconnectedness among the disciplines, with these features seen as contributing to the development of intellectual virtues and personhood. So whether or not one accepts Newman's religious motivations, this theme deserves serious attention, and it can be put both negatively and positively. Negatively, fragmentation and disconnection and one-sidedness are dangers to be avoided. With regard to fragmentation and its undermining of personhood, Reinhard Hutter refers to features of 21st century universities that need illumination and healing from Newman's educational vision. The vision can seem to be, says Hutter, an accidental agglomeration of advanced research competencies gathered in one facility for the sake of extrinsic and contingent conveniences, a place where instrumental rationality and ontological nihilism rule. And he goes on, about the university today, a highly sophisticated problem-solving machine at the service of those who are able and willing to pay for its services. A place for metric functionalization and managerial manipulation. Positively, Newman provided a balanced approach to education, stressing contemplation of the whole and concern for the whole person of students. In promoting truth, a perspective or view of the whole, studiousness, persistence, humility, collegiality, and prudence. Stratford Caldecott, an educational thinker who died earlier this year, recently articulated an educational vision in terms that would immediately be recognizable to John Henry Newman. This is what he said. A human being is made not for the processing of data, but of wisdom. Not for the utilitarian satisfaction of appetite, but for love. Not for the domination of nature, but for participation in it. Not for the autonomy of the isolated self, but for communion. Caldecott picks up and develops further Newman's concern to bring out how all knowledge fits together, when he says, the meaning of anything necessarily lies in its relation to the whole. A green leaf, taken by itself, only makes sense in its relation to the tree and to the sun and the nature of light and the process of photosynthesis, in the molecules of which it is composed and where they come from and the role it plays in the ecosystem. Well, for Newman, all forms of knowledge point to and depend upon its source and goal in God. Part of the attractiveness of Newman as a profound thinker about education is that regardless of whether you're actually persuaded by his theology, and despite the fact that so much of the university context has changed, you just think of cultural assumptions, social relations, economic considerations and conditions, and technological apparatus. Despite the changing context that's massive, since he wrote about the university in Dublin in the 1850s, Newman provides an enduringly appealing picture of an approach to education that is intellectually vital, humanizing, broad, and coherent. It is vital in that it moves beyond the transmission of information, transcends mere conceptual knowledge, seeks to engage the powers of students' minds, and leads into knowledge that is made real, assimilated, and owned, and therefore thereafter deployed by graduates in how they read and respond to the world. It is humanizing in that it reduces the power of selfishness, liberates students from their passions, provides them with principles that light up their way, makes them aware of their limitations and conscious of their shortcomings, and yet gives them reasons to hope and sufficient confidence in their powers to cope with the vicissitudes of life. It is broad in that Newman stresses the circle of knowledge, highlighting the attention to be given to a wide range of disciplines. Universal knowledge rather than specialization is his concern. He wants a high degree of roundedness in what is to be taught. And while this might make his students vulnerable to a certain lack of disciplinary depth, the breadth they achieve, in his view, will equip them to relate to different areas of knowledge appropriately, conscious of the need to respect their differing aims, methods, leading concepts, and types of focus, while remaining aware of the limited reach and fundamental incompleteness of each discipline. And Newman's vision of education is also coherent in that he strongly emphasized the need to bring out the unity and interconnectedness of the elements within the circle of knowledge. To quote him on the university, the university professes to assign to each study its own proper place and its just boundaries, to define the rights, to establish the mutual relations, and to effect the intercommunion of one and all, to keep in check the ambitious and encroaching, and to succor and maintain those which from time to time are succumbing under the more popular or the more fortunately circumstanced, to keep the peace between them all, and to convert their mutual differences and contrarieties into the common good. Thus, to draw many things into one is the special function of the university. Cumulatively, the stress that Newman gave to the circle of knowledge, the need for a university to pursue truth across a wide range of disciplines, awareness of the diversity and complementarity of these disciplines, and the imperative to foster unity between them, presents a major challenge to university educators today with regard to the curriculum experience that's offered to students. It seems to require an emphasis on wholeness that goes well beyond contemporary expectations or possibilities. Yet one might claim that an enduring legacy of his writing on the university, a legacy that still deserves to be received, is the strong case he makes that university education should enable students to develop for themselves a map, a schema, a framework, an interrelated perspective or view of how all aspects of their thinking hang together. We might call it an advanced organizer that helps them to sift, evaluate, place, and integrate incoming knowledge. Well, for the rest of the lecture, I'm going to do three things. First, I'm going to analyze what is it that Newman has to say about the circle of knowledge and curriculum wholeness. Then, I'm going to refer to just one recent response to Newman on this topic. And finally, I'm going to mention one challenge arising from Newman's treatment of the circle of knowledge and its implications for curriculum. And the challenge comes from the fact that his vision rests on an assumption that is no longer automatically accepted by many university educators or administrators. It depends on an understanding of the community, that the community is central to the nature of a university. So, Newman and the circle of knowledge. Newman sets out clearly that the human mind, when it examines the world, finds itself confronted not by chaos or by an endless number of unconnected and isolated facts, but by a system or an integral whole. The various sciences that emerge from disciplining our cognitive capacities and as a result of organizing our mental processes address what is ultimately, for Newman, one subject matter, albeit one that we approach piecemeal and under its various aspects. We may ask many different types of questions of this reality that we seek to know. We might be motivated by contrasting perhaps even contradictory concerns as we do so. We might carry out our investigation with varying degrees of precision, deploy diverse tools or lenses or conceptual frameworks which expose different features of reality. But for Newman, this reality, despite the differentiation in our perceptions of it, forms one whole, a universe. In order to attain reliable, well-founded, comprehensive knowledge of reality, we have to be aware that there is a whole circle of sciences, even though as individuals we cannot plumb the depths of them all. None on its own can reach the whole of reality. Each can attain, at best, only a partial vision. Each needs to be open to correction and augmentation by others. To treat any aspect of reality on its own through the specialist scientific methods and tools of only one scholarly discipline is likely to lead to distortion, imbalance, and misrepresentation, either by omission or by exaggeration of key perspectives. There is an essential unity and interconnectedness in the world such that each part is merely an abstraction from a seamless whole, and each science or form of knowledge is incomplete in its aims, scope, and significance. A university must ensure that it addresses the whole circle of knowledge. Here, no discipline can safely be left out, for its loss is a positive privation, Newman says, of an influence which exerts itself in the correction and completion of the rest. Within this circle, Newman was of the view that philosophy served an architectonic role. It could do so by fostering reflection on the scope and limits of each discipline, exploring the mutual bearings of one upon another, exposing their respective methodologies, leading concepts, and underlying presuppositions, and by drawing out the implications and questions that arose in each that could not satisfactorily be addressed from within the confines of that discipline. It is philosophy for Newman that facilitates the development of what he called the power of viewing many things at once as one whole, of referring them severally to their true place in the universal system, of understanding their respective values, and determining their mutual dependence, end quotation. Furthermore, he contended, theology must take its place in the circle within the circle, since it focused attention on the source and sustainer of the universe, its guiding force, the bringer into being of all that is, the one who endows humanity with the capacities to investigate and plumb the depths of this reality. To drop theology from the circle of knowledge would, Newman argued, be detrimental to the university in two respects. First, it would imply that theology provides no worthwhile knowledge, while of course for Newman it provided the most essential knowledge of all. And second, it would mutilate the circle. This mutilation would happen because the vacuum left by theology, if it was omitted, and the issues and questions it addresses would, he believed, inevitably be picked up by other disciplines that would in the process exceed their own limits and make claims that could not be substantiated about features of reality that they were not equipped to deal with. Furthermore, he said, if the drift and meaning of a branch of knowledge varies with the company in which it is introduced to the student, then the omission of theology from the university circle of knowledge could not avoid changing the nature of the company kept, along with the assumptions, commitments, patterns of behavior, modes of investigation, questions, and concerns associated with it. Second, one recent response to Newman. that's going to be Alistair MacIntyre, but just a word before that. In his important study of Newman, The Imperial Intellect by Dwight Culler, Culler situates Newman's work on the circle of knowledge in a much wider historical context, demonstrating that antecedents that Newman draws upon and then took forward included John of Salisbury, that's the 12th century, Bonaventure, that's 13th, Francis Bacon, late 16th, early 17th century, and Coleridge in the early 19th century. I would add two other names to Culler's list as Newman's antecedents on this topic of the circle of knowledge. One is Dante in the 13th century, and the other is Giambattista Vico in the 18th century. And Culler succinctly summarizes the difference between Newman and some of these antecedents like this. He says, Bacon held that the unity of the sciences lay in their method. Coleridge, that it lay in the unity of the mind itself. And Bonaventure, that it lay in their derivation from the single science of theology. But Newman held that all knowledge forms one whole because its subject matter is one. So I'm going to explore just one of the many recent retrievals of Newman by Alistair MacIntyre. MacIntyre is well aware that in several respects Newman seems at odds with contemporary thinking and practice about universities. The pursuit of specialized knowledge and the promoting of cutting-edge research, the range of arguments in support of university education that appeal to its utility, social or individual, and its nervous protection of what it understands as the nature of a secular institution, all of those seem quite distant from Newman's vision of what should constitute education in a university. Reasoning from foundations based on Christian faith, as Newman does, is assumed today to be incompatible with academic standards. And yet, as MacIntyre points out, reason without Christian faith is always reason informed by some other faith, characteristically, often, an unacknowledged faith. For MacIntyre, it's always more honest and more conducive to healthy argument to be conscious of one's presuppositions, for one cannot argue effectively in their absence, and to be explicit about them. In a striking phrase, MacIntyre says, to criticize contemporary universities from Newman's standpoint, which is actually what he's doing, would be like blaming a jet engine for not having all the excellences of a windmill. And yet he sets about his task with enthusiasm, with a conviction that current university practice fails to be transformative or to produce educated minds. MacIntyre laments the compartmentalization he sees as pervasive in universities and in the surrounding culture. And to counter this, he advocates some kind of integration of knowledge and interconnectedness of thinking that was sought by Newman. MacIntyre identifies two characteristics of compartmentalization. As for the first of these, this is what he says. Each of the separate spheres of activity through which individuals pass in the course of a day, or a week, or a month, has its own distinctive culture, its own modes of relationship, its own specific norms. So as individuals pass from home and family, to workplace, to school, to leisure time activities, and to political or religious associations, they become adroit in leaving behind the roles, norms, and attitudes proper to the sphere they've just left, and assuming those of the sphere that they're about to enter. What is being noted there by MacIntyre is the tendency to become a fluid and flexible self, one who adapts readily to the different expectations and roles one takes on, but without identifying oneself fully with any of them, regarding none as primordial, preeminent or directive of the others. In extreme cases, MacIntyre notes, the individual is nearly, if not quite, dissolved into the set of roles that she or he plays. As for the second characteristic of compartmentalization, rarely are individuals invited to view their lives as a whole in such a way that they're able to stand back from their everyday lives and judge themselves critically by a standard of human goodness external to and independent of those of the various spheres of activity in which they're engaged. In response to this comment by MacIntyre, it might be claimed that a failure to reflect on one's life as a whole will inevitably mean that the self of learners will at best be engaged only partially, and that not being available for inspection and reflection, neither can it be available for or subject to transformation. Or to put MacIntyre's point slightly differently, it seems that too much university education, if its curriculum too readily reflects the compartmentalization of the culture, leaves the personhood of students on the side and out of sight of what is being learned, and therefore makes it more likely that it will remain in its depth dimensions untouched. While educators, if they wish to be effective, have to begin with where the students are, their goal is to take them somewhere else, to facilitate transformation, not to leave them imprisoned by their past. In response to compartmentalization, MacIntyre, building on Newman, wants universities to help students to integrate what they have learnt, not just from the formal curriculum, but in all the different areas of the university's life, in the language laboratory, and in the chapel, on the baseball court, and in the library, in the social relationships of the residence hall, and in those of the philosophy seminar. Only through the effort of integration will students grow in the capacity to exercise the full range of their powers of understanding and judgment. Teaching in classrooms and conversation outside them should help students to recognize the goods that are at stake in the choices they make, and to ask, what is it about themselves that is relevant to the making of good or bad choices? And what is the significance of their choices in the great order of things? In fact, MacIntyre believes that it is in the conversation that is constitutive of community that the most influential learning takes place. Conversation between students and their teachers, and conversation outside of class between students, conversation that should be illuminated and leavened by what has occurred in classrooms. And of course to these we must add other conversations between faculty, who need to understand what is at stake in disciplines other than their own, and how the truth claims made in their disciplines play a part in one's view of the world. Such conversation should foster mutual appreciation in the face of the awareness of the insights to be gained from different approaches to reality, and it should also stimulate humility as one becomes more conscious of the limitations of one's own approach. The attitude to be fostered among students and faculty is thus described by MacIntyre in these words. Every science is itself incomplete and partial. But since each is indispensable for our understanding of the whole, none is reducible to any other. Each is a representation of some aspect of reality, and it is as the mind grasps how each part plays its part that the mind advances towards that comprehensiveness of the whole that it is the end of the human mind by its nature to achieve. I recognize that there is some tension between a tension that's noted both by Newman and by McIntyre between the depth of penetration that can be achieved by specialization and the breadth of perspective that is required for a sense of the whole to be developed. Finally, and briefly, my last bit, I'm simply going to pick up mainly one challenge that arises out of all this. But in the initial word again. Of course, there are lots of hurdles to be overcome. But despite the practical limitations of time, energy, resources, knowledge, and assistance that's available to faculty and students, which cumulatively prevent depth of knowledge being achieved across many fields, some key aspects of disciplines might be considered. Their key concepts, leading questions, inherent values, principal lines of approach to reality, to which might be added their central way of checking truth claims within the discipline. It's important to ask of any discipline, where are its limits? On what aspects of life or of nature is it not qualified to make a judgment? Well, here I merely point to one of Newman's key assumptions that needs energetic defense today in the face of competing pressures. And this is the assumption that curriculum wholeness rests on and requires the experience of community and the kinds of conversation that sustain community. In the idea of the university, Newman said of students, though they cannot pursue every subject which is open to them, they will be the gainers by living among those and under those who represent the whole circle. And then with regard to community, as essential for learning, he went on to say, and I quote him, an assemblage of learned persons, zealous for their own sciences, and rivals of each other, are brought by familiar intercourse and for the sake of intellectual peace to adjust together the claims and relations of their respective subjects of investigation. They learn to respect, to consult, to aid each other. When a multitude of young men, because it was men in his time, keen, open-hearted, sympathetic, and observant, when they come together and freely mix with each other, they are sure to learn from each other, even if there be no one there to teach them. The conversation of all is a series of lectures to each, and they gain for themselves new ideas and views, fresh matter of thought, and distinct principles for judging and acting, day by day. He was referring to the company that students provide for each other. Incidentally, another commentator on Newman, Jaroslav Pelikan, in his revisiting of the idea of the university about 1992, also came up with the same point, that he estimated that about a third of the students' learning should probably come from fellow students, and a third from the classroom, and a third from the other experiences there. The company kept by students can have a real impact on their learning, on whether it's integrated, owned, and acted upon. The quality of the conversations in which they take part, and those that they observe or overhear, can enhance or inhibit their education. And here I'm including not only conversation between students and fellow students, but conversations between students and faculty. Conversations between faculty will also influence their responses to students, because conversations have a world-constituting as well as a community-building function. Conversations can offer plausibility to our aspirations and values. They can open up options for us. They can reinforce our beliefs. They can strengthen our confidence. Or, of course, they can do the opposite of all these. This is as true for faculty as it is for students. Learning and scholarship depend on community. They do not flourish in splendid isolation from the work of others. Commenting on campus climate, Kim Phipps rightly observes that scholarship is rooted in connectedness, in mutual assistance, conversation, encouragement, support, and evaluation. Scholarship proceeds by building on what others have done, and it makes sense only in the context of what others are doing. The structure of mutual trust is evident within the individual disciplines. While many other scholars have drawn attention to the role of community in the university, and to community as an essential ingredient in the path to knowledge, most notably one of my heroes, Michael Polanyi. Community can play a motivational role, as I've said, but it can also convey and embody rationality. And thus it plays an epistemological role. And it can also play an ethical role, exemplifying and promoting courage, self-control, truthfulness, friendliness, and an environment of trust. For Newman, the experience of community, of living in community, was central to university education. Only the mutual exchanges and learning provided by the community could make possible an approach to the whole person. Only the community could show how the many could be made into one. Only the community could bring out the many-sidedness of the areas of knowledge. Only the community could exemplify how to make connections in the midst of difference. Community, for Newman, was a necessary, though not sufficient, condition for teaching the circle of knowledge and for the curriculum to display wholeness, unity, and interconnectedness. And the university, if it is to operate effectively as a university, rather than as a holding company for competing and inward-looking disciplines, still needs what Newman defended so eloquently, a sense of the whole to which all parts of the curriculum and all members of the community contribute. Thank you.